Isaac Newton, like many of his contemporaries, was obsessed with ancient Egypt, but he took it to the next level. He believed that the pyramids would actually reveal the circumference of the earth, and he believed that the pyramids held other secrets like gravity or mathematical equations that are yet to be discovered. Somehow he connected Egypt to the foundation of all civilization, stating in some of his books that the foundation of European civilization starts with Egypt. Before I look into his claims, I'd like to thank Blank Rampage 2 again for donating $4.99. Thank you. Like the Smithsonian says, some other European scholars of his day, Newton believed that the ancient Egyptians possessed knowledge that had been lost in the intervening centuries. The searching out of ancient occult secrets was a central trope of alchemy, a subject which Newton studied deeply. Newton was interested in the cubit, a unit of measurement used by the Great Pyramid builders. He believed that it could enable him to figure out the exact dimensions of other ancient structures. In particular, he hoped to learn the dimensions of the Temple of Solomon, which he thought could hold the key to understanding the biblical apocalypse. And if you've read some of these notes, and yes, they've been put out there in the internet so you can easily find them. If you read them, you'll notice that he comes across as more someone who is like a religious nut than a scientist in these papers, which is probably why he hid them and pretended that they got burned when people wanted to read them. So, what was going on with Isaac Newton? Why did he believe this? Well, a couple reasons. Firstly, he was a man that was dedicated to work and wanted to unveil the secrets of the world no matter where they came from. And this arcs back to the Muslim scholars that predated him, in which he clearly took a lot of inspiration from. His obsession with Egypt finds him writing books that are so crazy that you can tell it's like must be the first person, because what he did was he went and read original books by the Greeks and by the Romans. And you can see he takes too much inspiration from those books, because a lot of them are almost like, okay, I can see he says the first king of Egypt was Amun. And then he says he was taken over by the Ethiopian. And then, that Ethiopian became the richest in the world. And then he was taken over by a Libyan and a something else. And they just go in, the story goes in, and it starts with mythology and it goes crazier and crazier. Isaac Newton clearly was not focusing too much on the reality beyond what these guys were writing. He did not have skepticism when it came to the Greeks. In fact, it seems like he had blind allegiance to stuff like that and the Bible. He also seemed to just follow what the Bible says, and he, decided that the world was so many thousands of years old and all this other stuff that would be easily debunked. This is crazy considering that he's one of the smartest people in the world who, through his own work, he discovered gravity. And speaking of gravity, let's look at the detail of what the Smithsonian says Isaac Newton said. The reason why I can't bring up the book, which with the maths, is I'm not a deep mathematician, so I wouldn't be able to understand that what he says anyway. The pioneering scientist also tied his interest in the pyramids to his effort to understand gravity. He thought that the ancient Greeks had successfully measured the Earth's circumference using a unit called the stade, which he believed was borrowed from the Egyptians. By translating the ancient measurement, Newton hoped to validate his own theory of gravity. To show you what exactly he believed, I'm going to read the first part. The Canaanites who fled from Joshua retired in great numbers into Egypt, and there conquered Timaeus, king of Lower Egypt, and reigned there under their kings Salatus, Buen, Apochus, Thanes, Isis, until the days of Eli and Samuel. They fled on, slew, and sacrificed men after the manner of the Phoenicians, and were called shepherds by the Egyptians, who lived only on the fruits of the earth and abominated flesh eaters. The upper parts of Egypt were those days under many kings reigning as Coptus, Thebes. This Elephantitis and other places, which by conquering one another grew by degrees into one kingdom, over which M reigned in the days of Eli. In the year before Christ, 1125, Mithras reigned over the upper Egypt from Syene and Heliopolis, and his successor, Mis M, made a lasting war upon the shepherds soon after, and caused many of them to fly into Palestine, Edomia, Syria, and Libya, and under Lelix, Ezus, Inachus, Pelaglis, Elios, the first sea crops, and other captains into Greece. Before those days, Greece and all Europe was peopled by wandering Cimmerians and Scythians from the backside of the Euxine Sea, who lived a rambling wild sort of life, like the Tartars in the northern parts of Asia. Like many of the European scholars before him, he blames Egypt for the civilizations that occurred in Europe. And he also goes on to say that Ammon, as he writes, reigns in Egypt. He conquered Libya and reduced that people from a wandering savage life to a civil one, and taught them to lay up the fruits of the earth. And from him, Libya and the desert above it were anciently called Ammonia. He was the first that built long and tall ships with sails, and had a fleet of such ships on the Red Sea, and another on the Mediterranean at Erosa in Libya. The only place that he seems to give a solo creation is Egypt and Ethiopia, of which he claims, just like the ancients would, that they were in the southern parts of Egypt and more southern than Egypt. And to throw in an obviously magical scenario so that you can see that it's not just a history of a different kind, he says, Daedalus kills his nephew Tellus and flies to Minos, a priestess of Jupiter Amun, being brought by Phoenician merchants into Greece, sets up the oracle of Jupiter at Dodona. This gives a beginning to oracles in Greece, and by their dictates, the worship of the dead is everywhere introduced. Sisyphus, the son of Aeolus and grandson of Helon, reigns in Corinth, and some say that he built that city. Laius recovers the kingdom of Thebes. Athamas, the brother of Sisyphus and father of Phrix and Hele, marries Ino, the daughter of Cadmus. Rehoboam reigns. Theos is sent from Crete to Lemos, reigns there in the city Hephosia, and works in copper and iron. Alemnia, born of Electrio, the son of Perphas and Andromeda, and of Lycidius, the daughter of Pelops. Sisak spoils the temple and invades Syria and Persia, setting up pillars in many places. Jeroboam, becoming subject to Sisak, sets up the worship of the Egyptian gods in Israel. Sisak invades India and returns with triumph the next year, but one wins Tritirika Baki. He sets up pillars on two mountains at the mouth of the river Ganges. Theseus reigns, having overcome the Minotaur, and soon after unites the 12 cities of Attica under one government. Sisak, having carried on his victories to Mount Caucasus, leaves his nephew Prometheus there and eats in Colchis. Now you're probably thinking, what's wrong with that? That sounds like something they used to write about back in the day. This is backward thinking for back in the day. Even back for the time that Isaac Newton was alive. This is backwards thinking. It's not even close to the histories. I mean, we're getting so close to Charles Darwin. We're getting so close to a lot of theories that have to do with how the world actually works. And he's thinking in a very ancient way. And even ancient Greeks and ancient Romans weren't this crazy about how the world worked. And I think some of the stuff that he takes seriously, he doesn't understand that the ancient Romans looked at it more as like a star sign thing than a actual god. And he's taking these stories as if they're actual gods. Something interesting he mentions is female fighters in the armies of the Libyans. He says Sisak, passing over the Heliopoint, conquered Thrace, kills Lycurgus, king thereof, and gives his kingdom and one of his singing women to Orgus, the father of Orpheus. Sisak had in his army Ethiopians commanded by Pan and Libyan women commanded by Myrina or Minerva. It was the custom of the Ethiopians to dance when they were entering into a battle, and from their skipping, they were painted with goat feet in the form of satyrs. You're probably wondering who Myrina is. Well, Myrina is the queen of the Amazon, and it's interesting here that she uses a Libyan woman army to rule, and as we've seen, Libyans and Ethiopians have had females ruling. And of course, some other people have noticed that there are other groups of female rulers or female warriors from around the world, like in Russia and in other places. And these stories might have inspired the Greeks to write about these female warriors. And so the Amazon might be based on real people, but exaggerated for mythological effect.